If you're gearing up to get a kegerator, there's some stuff you should know. Before you can start pouring draft beer at home, you've got some decisions to make. And in this video, I'm going to break down each component of a kegerator and make sure you know your options. Not only that, but Newair sent over this single tap kegerator so I could show you exactly what I would do when setting up a new kegerator. Now, let's start closest to the beer with the keg. Just like bottles and cans, the keg's job is to seal the beer to maintain freshness and carbonation until it's consumed. When you remove beer from any of these containers, carbonation naturally moves from the beer to the empty space inside the container, and the beer eventually goes flat, even if it remains sealed. So a half-filled can will always go flat, but with kegs, this problem is solved with gas. Gas plays two roles in your kegerator. It keeps your beer carbonated and it forces the beer out of the keg and into your glass. The two most common gases used in a kegerator system are CO2 and beer gas, which is most commonly a mixture of somewhere around 30% CO2 and 70% nitrogen. CO2 is the standard and least expensive route, and beer gas provides a nice head and thick body that's perfect for styles like milk stout. Now, in order to connect the keg to the kegerator, you're going to need a coupler. When you're buying beer in the US, you'll most likely find kegs with Sankey keg connections, so you'll need a coupler that looks like this. Sankey couplers pop right into your kegs and have a pressure relief valve, gas in port, and liquid out port. And if you're making your own beer to fill your kegerator, you'll most likely be using a keg with ball lock connections or the less common pin lock connections, so you'll need couplers that look like this. Depending on the lines you choose, you might be able to use quick connections like these duo-tight fittings to connect your coupler to your lines. And that brings us to probably the most important part of a kegerator. In most home systems, the pressure needed to keep your keg carbonated is greater than the pressure needed to push the beer from the keg to your glass. And if the beer hits your glass with too much pressure, you'll be left with nothing but foam. To compensate for this, you'll use the diameter and length of your lines to provide enough resistance to slow the beer down for the perfect pour. After a quick search online, you can find plenty of calculators that will help you determine exactly what you need. But don't just go buying any beer line. Cheap options like these PVC lines will get the job done, but can expose your beer to oxygen as it sits in the line and can hold on to flavors from keg to keg. Modern beer line, like this Ava barrier double wall tubing, is engineered to solve these problems. The outer layer basically protects the inner layer, adding rigidity while staying flexible, and the inner layer acts as a gas barrier and also provides some antimicrobial protection. And as a bonus, this line works hand in hand with duo-tight quick connections. Now, from here, we move to the Shank and we're almost pouring beer. The Shank mounts to the kegerator and connects the faucet to the beer line. It needs to be just long enough to be mounted in your kegerator, and you'll need the correct barb size or duo-tight fitting to connect to your beer line. And finally, the faucet. The faucet is where the beer flows out of the kegerator, and at first glance, you might think they're all the same and be tempted to buy yours as cheaply as possible. When buying your faucet, you'll notice there are two kinds: forward sealing and rear sealing. Standard rear sealing faucets like this one are the cheapest option, and they've been pouring great beer for decades. But the trade-off for a low price is a design that prioritizes production cost over sanitation. When the faucet seals in the rear, a large portion of the faucet is left exposed to open air with beer on its surface. And obviously, that can get nasty without regular cleaning. The other option is a forward sealing faucet like this Nuka tap. These seal much closer to the tip of the faucet, leaving much less surface area vulnerable to nasties. And one more thing you can consider here is flow control. This feature can be found on both faucet types, and it allows you to slow down the flow of the beer to reduce foaming in the glass. And lastly, we can step back and consider the Kegerator itself. You can cut costs by using a fridge or a freezer with an external temperature controller, or you can go with something purpose-built. This part basically comes down to efficiency, capacity, and cost. For this Newair single tap Kegerator, I decided to go with a vintage handle on a NukaTap flow control faucet, the included shank and 90-degree barb, 10.5 feet of 5mm Ava barrier tubing, ball lock couplers with duo-tight fittings, a 2.5-gallon ball lock torpedo keg, and a short run of 6mm tubing to my CO2 tank on the back of the Kegerator, providing 10 pounds of pressure. And if I want to buy a commercial keg, I can easily swap out the ball lock couplers for a Sankey coupler and attach that to the rest of the system with the correct duo-tight fittings. As you build out your system, remember that you can swap out and upgrade parts over time. So if you can't spring for the fancy faucets on top of the cost of everything else, don't worry. Get the cheap ones, keep them clean, and upgrade to Perlix or NukaTaps when the time is right. Whatever you do, don't cheap out on the beer lines. Crappy beer lines will force you to waste beer and end up costing you more money in the long run. Huge thanks to Newair for sending us this Kegerator and supporting homebrewing. If you're looking for a turnkey Kegerator, this kit comes with everything you need, including a CO2 tank, a regulator, tubing, and a faucet. All the links and discount codes are neatly organized in the description. My name's Dan, this is Hops and Gnarly. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again soon.